Maurice Nicole's Psychological Commentary, Volume 2, based on his work with Gurdjieff, Birdlip, February 17, 1945, Commentary on Acquired Conscious. This is part 1 of 3. 1. The work teaches that we all have acquired conscience, which is different in different people and nations, but we all have real conscience, which is buried. Do you think that acquired conscience is based on self-love, and do you think that real conscience is not? Let us speak about acquired conscience. Everyone has different acquired conscience according to his or her upbringing. Suppose you have been brought up to think that a person who wears brown boots and a top hat is beyond the pale, then you will have acquired conscience in judging him. You will call this conscience. And if you yourself wear brown boots with a top hat, you will be deeply pricked by your acquired conscience. Meeting such a person, you will tend to have nothing to do with him. Let us glance at the different forms of acquired conscience that exist nowadays and have always existed. Understand that acquired conscience makes us divide things into right and wrong according to its nature. We say that brown boots with top hats are impossible. But let's look at it more deeply into this question. Say you meet a man who is very interesting, and after being with him for a long time, you suddenly notice he has a top hat and brown boots. Instantly, your buffers will come into action, and instead of taking him as a person, as himself, you will take him as an example of bad taste. In recent conversation, we were talking about this subject, and a large part of the tradition plays into this question. Tradition forms an acquired conscience in us and is stronger than an individual contact with a person. Tradition makes you not yourself. You have traditional eyes in you that are acquired, which make it very difficult for you to become a real person, a real individual, free to communicate with everyone, and so it narrows down your relationship to people. You may privately think political agreement is a good thing, but your traditional eyes will prevent you from accepting it. We see many examples of this today. This means that your acquired conscience, traditional in this sense, prevents you from behaving intelligently as an individual. You're then collective and not individual in your judgment of things. You're really sacrificing your individual judgment of traditional conscience. But this is not real conscience, it is acquired conscience. A man stands on his honor, his tradition, his patriotism, and so on, and all this acquired conscience, something he has been brought up to believe in, and such a man is not capable of direct individual thinking in connection with an actual situation. He will not give up his acquired conscience, which is various in different nations. Whereas the work teaches that real conscience is the same in everyone and not various. Through it, agreement is possible. You can see and will see many examples of the action of acquired conscience now and in the future, such that you cannot understand how people can be so silly as to behave as they do. Then you will notice how this acquired conscience prevents any further development of the human race. To get into contact with real conscience, one has to become more conscious of one's own mechanical reactions. And you can take this idea down to its final issues as regards your social life and so on. Yet behind all this infinite confusion acquired by tradition, upbringing, etc., there lies real conscience, through which all people can come into relationship with one another once the acquired conscience is observed and worked against by a process of giving up its purely mechanical reactions to others. Now, acquired conscience is always connected with the self-love, which continually puffs itself up into all forms of vanity, all forms of making difficulties, of duty, etc., based on prestige, tradition, honor, nationality, and so on. In this way, self-love incites continual antagonism, war, violence, and so on. That is why the work lies such emphasis on false personality, on invented things, on false behavior carried out in the name of so much that is really meaningless. As a Scotsman, I meet a man who belongs historically to a clan that has always been at war with my clan. I get on with this man very well in conversation, think of him intelligent, and like him until I find out that he is one of the accursed clan that by tradition and honor I must hate. So I rise from the table, throw my wine in his face, and go fight a duel with him. This means I sacrifice my individual understanding to my acquired traditional conscience. This, of course, is sin in the deepest sense of the word, that is missing the mark. Instead of seeing the man individually and understanding him, I become suddenly blind, violent, and sacrifice myself to the eyes that belong to my acquired traditional conscience. In other words, I lose all possibility of individual development through my own intelligence and understanding. Recently, I was reading novels written 100 years ago. I came across the idea that a person who knits is quite to be looked down on, whereas a woman who embroiders is all right. Notice carefully that this will make an acquired conscience in a person brought up in those times, and such a person may meet a woman who he likes very much and suddenly discover that she knits, and then may have nothing more to do with her. Is this acquired conscience or real conscience? Now let us take some examples. One person says an Englishman's word is his bond hypnotizes people into feeling that all English can be trusted. If an Englishman were accused of breaking his promise, he might say, "Don't you know I'm English? All I can say is that it may be so." But brought up to this idea, a man will not be able to get in touch with his real conscience, nor will he be able to see how often he does not fulfill his picture of himself in his domestic life, his marriage vows, and so on. In this connection, let me quote the following example in which you have a certain kind of acquired conscience developed by the surrounding influences, exemplified by the idea of a sporting conscience, which is certainly an acquired conscience. The example is as follows. A sportsman's conscience would not allow him to cheat at games, but in business affairs, he would have no such scruples. Next, we have a very good example of how acquired conscience is based on self-love, and how when the self-love is hit, we feel miserable. Our idea of what we should or should not do comes solely from what we want thought about us. We make pictures of ourselves and are most offended if other people do not believe in them. We think it is awful to be late because we don't want to be that sort of person from the vanity point of view, not from external considering at all. We say we are conscience stricken if we have been lazy, selfish, or uncharitable, or lost our tempers in public. Acquired conscience does not seem to mind if these things are done in private.